All right, hi everybody. We're gonna get started. So my name is Megan. Welcome all to Speak, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Her name is Kerlin, and she works for UC Davis Strategic Communications. So let's give her a warm welcome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming out on a beautiful Friday to talk about science communication. I'm curious, how many of you are actually from or affiliated with UC Davis today? Oh, good. So many people. Okay. How many of you aren't? And you're most welcome. Yay. Thanks for coming. Okay. And how many of you are scientists? All of you? Or are there outreach specialists among you? Kind of a combination of the two? Okay. Great. Just kind of wanted to get a feel for what we have going on. So like you said, I'm Kat. I work with the news team here on campus in the Office of Strategic Communications. And to me, I was an environmental journalist for about 12 years. Took a couple of years within there to go to the Peace Corps in Ecuador. And then I've been here for about 6.5 years as a press officer. And throughout all of that, the thing that I think is that, a lot about communicating science, communicating anything is really about trust. You can say something as clearly as possible, but if a person doesn't really trust you and who you are and what you're saying, it doesn't really matter. And there are some communication tools you can do to build trust, but there's also just that personal tools that you have to work on to build trust. But it's just something to keep in mind that it's not all about the information you put out there, but in how you relay it to people. I really wanted to introduce in the corner my colleague, Amy Quinton. Some of you may know her from Capital Public Radio, where she was just 2 months ago, I think. 2 months ago, yeah. And then we stole her. And so now she's a press officer in our office, and she's going to help later today. We're going to be doing, the bulk of this is not me talking, it's you guys talking to each other for about an hour and a half, working out the messages for your own work with each other, and we're going to try and refine those skills. So these are just a few little tips for you before we get into that. And Amy and I and Megan are going to kind of wander around to those groups while you work on your messaging and see if we can see how far we can get in a couple hours with our science communication. So let's see. Did I turn this on? Let me just click. What did I do? Okay, try it now. Okay. So yeah, a little bit about me. So a lot of what I do, most of what I do probably is connecting scientists with journalists and journalists with scientists through a lot of different means and methods. Increasingly, we're also just going straight to the public. You can do that now with social media. We're learning how to do that better with social media. I cover environmental sciences. So we recently launched at UC Davis a science and climate website where we're posting a lot of feature stories and getting those stories onto our social media and just realizing that the media is still a very, very important tool, but we have so many tools that we can now use to just directly reach people too that we're really exploring through our social media, but also, partnerships with other media. One of my favorite parts of this was an interactive feature we did with the Center for Watershed Sciences group here, going down the Grand Canyon. Just finding different ways to tell our story. There's so many different ways. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about science communication. Who are your target audiences? What's the way they like to digest information? What are some fun ways? What are some serious ways? What are the different ways you can do that? Okay, so we're talking about trust. You should be happy to learn that most of you are still fairly well trusted. Scientists as a whole are more trusted than I am, more trusted than the media, more trusted than my kid's school principal. You think scientists have gotten a lot of flack and feel a lot of flack lately, but just know that you've actually got it better than the rest of us. But there's a lot of way we can go, right? And there are barriers to that trust sometimes, and a lot of that parts with communication. I'm hoping this plays because John Oliver lays it out pretty well. Oh, come here. Some of those barriers.
Summarising a study for a wider audience. For instance, earlier this year, a medical society hosted a conference at which a paper was presented comparing the effects of high and low flavanol chocolates during pregnancy. If that sounds narrow and technical, it was supposed to be. There wasn't even a control group of women who didn't eat chocolate, and the study found no difference in preeclampsia or high blood pressure between women who ate the two chocolates. So there is no way a study that boring can make it to television, right? Well, wait, because that medical society issued a press release with the much sexier but pretty misleading title, The Benefits of Chocolate During Pregnancy, And because most TV producers just read press releases, this happens.
Turns out if you're pregnant, eating 30 grams a day of chocolate, that's about 2/3 of a chocolate bar, not the whole chocolate bar, could improve blood flow to the placenta and benefit the growth and development of your baby, especially in women at risk for preeclampsia or high blood pressure in pregnancy.
Except that's not what the study said. It's like getting a telephone. The substance gets distorted at every step. And I can only imagine how someone who watched that segment must have described it the next day. Oh, the news said our baby is made of chocolate and it's okay if I eat it, but only 2/3.
Okay, so that concept is a lot of people's worst nightmare, right? That you say something and it gets completely muddled and messed up and it's not at all what you said. And that's really just to illustrate that there are a lot of different points along the way that miscommunication can happen. And that's why it's important to be really clear from the beginning. There's some, am I doing something? Should I turn this down? Oh, like this? That should work. Okay. Sorry. So a lot of things I think were at fault there. I'm guessing the scientist probably was a little at fault in not being really diligent with the press officer in writing that press release, because press officers like me need to make sure we're working with you to make sure that we're getting out what you actually found and what the actual results are. So press officer was probably at fault, scientist was probably at fault, and the news media was at fault because they didn't look at it clearly enough, right? So sometimes there's very little you can do about that when people take things out of context. Sometimes you can do everything you want to do and everything right. You can do everything right. Press officer can do everything right. Things can still get a little distorted. But what you can do is focus on what you do, which is be as clear as you possibly can be. Not give people too much information, but really just enough so they know what to actually focus on. So look at this for just a couple seconds. What did you see? Holler it out. Okay, lots of things. If I were to ask you the same question, do you think we'd hear more similar answers? What do you see here? Mm-hmm. There's a lot less there. You kind of know what to focus on. There's 3 different things, but still, it's much more defined. You're not just thrown everything, right? You get it. Okay. So like I said, later we're going to be spending a lot of time on crafting our message, but that's what this is really about. It's about, before you go out there, take the time to really think about what it is, not just what your research is about, but like what you want to say about it, what you want people to come away thinking and remembering about it. What's the main issue? What are the big problems, solutions, and benefits? And like I say, we're going to delve in deeper on that. And last but not least, and this is so big and it's forgotten a lot. So what? Why should anybody care about what you have to tell them? You know, why should they think about yourselves when you're listening to the radio in your car? You know, if what you're hearing on the news or wherever isn't something you're immediately interested in, you don't understand, right? It's the same with anyone. It's nothing to be ashamed of. You know, it's just that you have to engage and you have to be clear from the beginning, or they really will just tune out. This is just an example. Kristen Apollino is one of our researchers at the Bodega Marine Laboratory here. She's a wonderful science communicator and person with a great project. So she's got a lot of good stuff going on for her. But an example is her main issue was, well, the research project she's working on is white abalone are nearing extinction. The key problem to that is white abalone no longer reproduce in the wild due to overfishing. They can't find each other to reproduce. A possible solution that she's been working on is a successful captive breeding program. The benefits to resolving that, if they can do that, maybe they can reintroduce them to the wild and frankly, save the species, right? So, okay, so getting to that, so what? You know the journal articles, there's the intro and the methods, and then finally there's the conclusions, right? That's the way that you as scientists need to write your journal articles and publications. When you're talking to the public, when you're doing press releases, when you're talking to your family members over Thanksgiving, perhaps, you need to flip that. People forget this a lot. And tell us more about why and what you're doing than all of the, well, yeah. Tell us what you're doing. I just said that differently. More what and less why. I'm gonna have to reframe this whole slide actually, because it's like, what is it that you found? Why is it important? And I guess I said less why. It was more like less about the methods and all of that. Those are important, but they're really less important to the average person than what does this have to do with me?
Maybe less how.
Yes, I'm gonna revise my slide. Thank you. I'll just let you, right? Just confusing. Okay, so one way to help reduce that is to really try and strip your jargon as much as possible. I'm sure you've heard about this. It's just a great reminder. Sometimes we all forget what jargon even is. I'm guilty of that. We're all guilty of that. Try and maybe play it off. Before you go out to do some sort of talking, talk with someone who is not in your field. Maybe they're even another scientist. Scientists are very good at noticing jargon in other scientific fields. You know, I've seen this, it's like this fun game. So think about different words that you can use. And I realize that sometimes, you know, jargon, while it might just be complete gibberish to me.
Hello everyone. I'm excited to hear this presentation.
Exactly what you're trying to say. And there are times even when you do need to say that word. But just if you do need to do that, say the word, briefly describe it, really brief, and then move on, just so people can get it if it's really unavoidable. Some people have said, oh gosh, but if I don't use that word that I might find isolating, they'll say my peers will think I'm dumb. And I've had people say this to me, someone who was about to go on Science Friday and we were practicing for that. And she really wanted to use this term. She ended up not using the term. I'm glad for her. But she really was like, my peers will think I'm dumb if I don't do that. And all I can really say is, in a lot of times, it's not, you have to remember, as hard as it is, your peers aren't really the target audience in those cases. And I hope your peers can begin to understand that too. This is a tough one. But you have to remember your audience, because like say in that radio show, she'd use that jargony word, or in a news piece or something. Your peers will never hear it because they won't use it. It'll be ununderstandable and it won't get used. You know, it's not dumb to be clear. There have been studies that are showing, you know, that jargon is actually kind of a red flag that it might be fraudulent. There was a study that showed that fraudulent papers had about 60 more jargon-like words per paper compared to unretracted papers. That was interesting. Kind of taking a different leap here, but is that going to play yet? This is an example of one of our, don't play, if you don't mind not playing it yet.
That's fine.
One of our faculty got called to talk about, well, you'll see, they had to kind of pivot. He thought he was going to be talking about one thing, and the other guy interviewing thought they were talking about something else. This is for a very, you know, it's MSNBC live interview over a really contentious issue at the time. It was about climate change and scientists in December after the election, and people thought, you know, not hiding, but trying to save climate data. Anyway, you'll have to see what it is. But I want you to kind of look and see what you think about how this faculty member did in this kind of really hot seat situation. Think about how you might, suggestions you might have for that person, or how you might have done it differently or not. Okay. Try to present unless I just try pressing it.
Climate science is already so threatened by the incoming administration that scientists are literally copying U.S. climate data, fearing it might vanish under President Trump. One of those scientists trying to protect vital data is Ben Bolton. He's a professor at University of California, Davis, director of the John Muir Institute of the Environment. He joins me now. All right, Ben, I saw this story today and it really sort of struck me. So first I want to tell me what exactly you're doing.
It's a great question, and I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat it. That the climate science community is hurt and feeling rejected by the president-elect Trump's moves, and it's almost as if Trump is cooking up this amazing Thanksgiving meal, and we're over at the kid table. And we want to be at the adult table. And why do we want to be there? We want to be there to share the good news that climate change is a job creator. Responding with climate solutions gives rise to all sorts of economic opportunities for people in this country. And we don't want to miss out on that. And so as a community, we're coming together to develop new cooperative ways to get that message out to the public, to make sure that they understand that this is about them, this is about their future, and it's about the here and now.
I get the positive message here, but what you were doing, I understand, is copying data that you were afraid that an incoming administration would either manipulate or delete.
I can't speak to that general issue since I myself am not involved in copying those data, but I am trying to make sure that we protect climate science in every way possible. And being in California, we have this tremendous opportunity to work with our local government here, with Governor Brown and the University of California system. We're seeing this ground level upswell of climate scientists coming together and basically recognizing that we need to be empowered. And this is a call to arms. This is a call to action for us to develop new ways to make sure that we're protecting climate research for people on the planet. And that's what we care most about.
How important is the federal government and people in the civil service to the things that we know about the climate? I mean, how much of that is coming from federal government that will now be run by someone who has said that it's all a Chinese hoax?
I mean, it's true that the federal government plays a huge role, especially when you look at the Paris Agreement, but also in the sort of knowledge of climate change.
Yeah, that's what I mean, like the data. Like how much are we dependent on just different people in the federal government, whether it's the stuff we have at NOAA, whether it's the observatory we have in Hawaii, whether it's the stuff that NASA does, how much of that depends on the federal government?
A tremendous amount of it does, and that's under threat right now. So if you look at NASA or NOAA, or these other organizations like the U.S. Geological Survey, they are providing all sorts of climate data that then can help us develop solutions so we can climate-proof our society, grow food without those crops failing because of climate change, so on and so forth. And so it is under threat, and we do this as a super important message that we hope President-elect Trump understands. Climate science is vital to national security.
How under threat is it? I guess we haven't been in these territories before, but I mean, like, how much could it be the case that a new administration would just say, the Department of Energy or EPA, like, yeah, we're just going to get rid of all of these parts of the government that do all these readings that produce this, what we believe is a hoax?
I mean, it's certainly hard to quantify exactly what that would look like, and to the extent that the executive can kind of come in and determine these things. But this isn't what President when Bush II came to office. There was certainly an assault on climate change at that time. We were able to get through that time period by local state action. And we're hoping that we can do the same now. But certainly, the federal issue, this is a national treasure. And I would hope everyone in your audience understands that climate science is a treasure for our kids, for our planet, and for our future.
We have colleagues at UC Davis who are actually doing this sort of copying of data. To folks that hear that, how under the gun do the people in your community, and I know a lot of climate scientists who already feel under the gun, frankly, because they spend their life working on this. How under the gun do you feel right now?
Well, look, I've had more conversations with climate scientists, and we're not climate scientists. They're lawyers, they're doctors, they're veterinarians. Every aspect of our society has stake in this challenge of climate change. So we're all coming together in new ways. At UC Davis in particular, we're developing a new initiative to connect people across all disciplines. But, climate change doesn't know politics. When the sea level rises, it doesn't decide to go to a Democrat or Republican house. Right? And so we need to really make sure that this is understood by the broader public. All right, thank you very much.
I'd love to hear what you guys think. What do you think you did well, or what do you think, anybody? The two of them together, yeah. There's a backstory that I won't bother you with, but yeah.
I thought the scientist was better than the reporter. Because I thought the reporter was the one who was struggling more than the scientist. Because the scientist got his message across and he said what he wanted to say. So he talked about what he wanted to talk about. But the reporter was really struggling.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Being a journalist, I'm like, the scientist was not answering the journalist
Right.
question.
Right.
And it's probably not either one of their fault. It's probably not the scientist. This is what we're going to talk about. These are the questions we're going to ask.
Knowing intimately the details behind this, I know that is the case. And in fact, they thought they had a totally different person. We thought they had Nick Santos to come on, and it was Ben, and somehow that wasn't relayed to the host. But at any rate, I think you're all right. I think there was a lot of like good and not so good aspects to this interview, and I'm showing it just because that's life, you know, like it's not going to be perfect. There can be mismatched weird things that happen, but I will, you know, whatever, maybe Ben could have been stronger or not, but he did stick to his message, and he could only do that because he prepped a lot. That said, he had like a day to prep, but he focused. He and I met, but he also, you know, talked to his wife and talked to his kid, and he was like practicing his points, and his colleagues too. So at any rate, those can be tough situations. And in fact, he had a very, I mean, he's not talking to somebody who doesn't believe in climate change. You know, it could have been a lot harder interview, but still, it's tricky. It can be intense in those situations. So, oh, where's my fun little graphic? I want to show you. I just love my little turtles. There we go. Oh, sorry, bear with me. So worth it to watch them swim up, and they like high five. It's so cute. Never mind. Moving on. The turtles give each other high fives. And my thing to you, and I truly, truly mean it because I've seen it a lot. Not a lot, actually, not a lot. But occasionally I'll see scientists kind of picking on other scientists for ways that they think they should have said this, or they shouldn't have said that, or they said it in the wrong way, or all these things. And all of that's part of scientific dialogue. You know, you can have that. There's room for that. But just remember, this is tough, challenging, courageous work to go out and do this work. So keep that in mind when you're talking to your colleagues about science communication once they get in those hot seats. Okay, I'm going to move along here, sorry. But so that's just an example. Ecosystem services, so many of you use it. Most of the public doesn't know what it means. Nature's benefits is something that they understand better. Analogies are so your friend. Everybody, well, I'm a sucker for analogies, and I've noticed a lot of reporters and the public are too. This woman used it in Senate testimony as well as a lot of nice media reports. She was looking at plastics in the ocean and pollution, and she said, you know, if you see your bathtub overflowing with water, you don't run in and start like cleaning up the floor. You go and you turn the water off. And that was instantly, you know, you get that quickly. That's what you got to do with plastic. This was next two slides are things that our researchers have done. We did these analogies, and it's almost like it's uncanny how you use an analogy people get, and you get coverage, and you want that to be accurate. But this was one about how we found that, like ordering a diet soda with a side of fries, households who buy a fuel-efficient vehicle tend to buy a bigger, more powerful second one to compensate. Pretty easy analogy. This one did really well just because it painted a picture. You know, like bristlecone pine, they're this really enigmatic, cool tree that people love anyway. But there's this idea that they're kind of in this very slow motion race of sorts with another species called limber pine that are a mere 2,000 years old, not 5,000, like the bristlecone. And like this idea of these like two old like creatures giving up the mountainside was something that I think at least attracted those outlets, and that climate change was the starting gun. That one did quite well. Secondhand smog, I worked on this with Ian Faluna. He's a researcher here, and we came up with this when he was just talking to me about, you know, smog coming over from Asia and the impact of that on the Central Valley. And he said, you know, here's California, and here's the Golden Gate Bridge, and here's its lips, and it's like sucking in all of this into the lungs of the Central Valley. And I was like, you know, a couple hours later, probably like taking a shower or something, I was like, it's kind of like secondhand smoke, you know, like they're the ones doing it, but you're the ones breathing it. And it was alliterative, and nobody really used that term, and it did really well. And Ian, I think, still uses that when he talks about this work. Sometimes timing can just be your friend. This was sort of a fluke. We did a news release about how one of our researchers who studies in Greenland a lot noticed that the plants were flowering a lot sooner, basically, with climate change. And it happened to be around the same time that there were several reports about that kind of thing happening all over the world and nation. And so that also became part of this New York Times story and The Guardian. So all that's just to say, you know, I think that the public is, as all in all this says, on a blind date with science. I think you know, you guys are pretty well trusted, but there's still a little bit like, I don't know about this guy. It's like, you know, there's still a lot of room for improvement there. So, you know, we're on a blind date. Bear with me, I like my analogies. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can make someone fall in love with you, right? You can like impress them with your intellect, the great information you have, how useful it is. You can like, you know, make them laugh. You can show them the world in a cool way they've never seen before. There's different ways to like engage people in this work. You can be playful. Was it NASA? They called this mission on oceans are melting Greenland, OMG. And they did that on purpose because they wanted people to take notice of it and be like, OMG, Greenland is melting, you know, to get that's attention. And that was from NASA, who has earned the right to be playful. Like they are already respected. I mean, that's something to consider too. You know, where are you at? You want to be careful about when you use certain types of humor, but sometimes people who don't really know that they care about science are just, we're all interested in weird and wacky gee whiz things in our world. You know, these are these tardigrades that are, they survived 4 mass extinctions. They found them like frozen and then they thaw out and then they just start like moving around. And, like, they're just amazing creatures and they don't, anyway. Gee whiz, amazing science. We love that kind of thing. Oysters and snails, not the most enigmatic creatures, right? I don't really feel a lot of resonance with them. But Amy actually did a story on the press release we did on this one. When Brian Chang, he's a postdoc, he's moved on now, but he was talking about how there's these oyster drills and they're drilling into the oysters, and it had to do with how oysters could probably do okay with climate change if they could outpace these drills that are trying to get them. And, you know, Brian and I were talking, I was like, well, so what do they do? And he went on and started talking about this awful way that they die, which is not fun stuff, but it was fascinating. It's like, imagine you're an oyster and this thing comes on and it drills its tongue into you. And I don't know, it caught my attention. I was, you know, I think it was fascinating, if not particularly pleasant. Okay. So, you know, scientists, as you should, prioritize educating and informing the public. That is rightly your #1 goal. But just always keep in mind, and again, coming back to trust, that the public's willingness to listen to you has more to do with your warmth and likability. You know, like maybe we should start have a beer with a scientist tonight or something. You know, people need to feel you're a real person, and then they'll be more open to, have you started that?
There is one in
Of course
I
there
am not
is.
involved.
Okay, so there are you. But just don't forget that. Try to be warm and likable. I'm sure you all are. Be real, be personable, relatable, passionate, funny. Take it for granted you're intelligent and know what you're talking about. Try to be these things too when you do engage with people. And then my message to you is truly just take the time to know your message before you go out and just start talking. Take a second. There's a lot of techniques you can do that if you're being interviewed. If somebody calls you right off, you can say, can I call you back in 5 minutes? And you can take that time and, okay, I want to mention this, this, and this. And you know, think about, like, what's it going to mean to the world? Why should anyone care? What do I hope they take from this, if nothing else? And be sure you get those points across, like Ben did. He got his points across one way or another. Okay. Are there any questions before we move on to the meat of the message box building?
You were clear and thoughtful.
Thank you. I try. I worry about that sometimes.
Online.
Okay, no. If you have any questions and you're attending virtually, feel free to chat them. And then otherwise you can go ahead and explain the message box. Right?
You got somebody, Amy from Berkeley, saying congrats to you. She came out with you on the Fire Lab tour in Yosemite and says you're a great asset to the science world, which you are. So, okay. Well, if you have any questions for me, I'm around later and I'm always around. So there you go. What we're going to do now is you have a message box. This is a tool, deceptively simple, that this wonderful nonprofit called Compass, they're a science communication nonprofit group, developed. And you also, there was scientists always ask about how to communicate uncertainty, and there's also a handout about that. I just printed out to give to you. It's always an ongoing topic. But take about 15 minutes, think about something that maybe you expect to talk about with somebody, whether it's media, like, you know, a high school class, Congress, something. Think about what you're wanting to talk about that's relevant to your research. Who you're talking to. There's a spot there that says audience, and I'll let you look at those sheets, but you can see some examples of kind of how to do that. And what you're trying to get down to at the end of this process is to really drill down on that so what. Like, these are the main things. This would be my headline. You know, if I had a headline to my research, this is what it is. And we're going to refine those together, we're going to break up in groups and practice with each other on that. Amy and I and Megan can help facilitate some of that. And then at the end, we'll ask for a couple volunteers to do some mock interviews with me and Amy, just to the group, see how it goes. But it's all just about learning and practicing. So I'm just going to give you about, what time is it? 2:38. Okay, I'm going to give you like 10 to 15 minutes to think about that and work on your message box by yourself. No split groups.
There's like some examples in the first few pages, so if you need some inspiration.
Yeah. I'm going to interrupt just briefly because some people have questions, and you might as well, on how the heck to do this. Like, does it have an order? Do I need to go in a certain way? There is no wrong or right way to do it, but I would advise you start with your issue, right? What's your broad topic that I want to talk about? What's the audience you want to reach? And then, as I say, you can go in whatever way that makes sense to you. If I were to do it, I would probably go, what are the problems that I'm working on to solve with this issue? Why is that important that I'm working on this issue? You know, so what? What is the point of all of this? But you could do the so what at the end too. That might make sense too. What are the solutions that my work is looking at that might be possible solutions? It's okay too. And if people were to do these solutions that I'm suggesting, what might be the benefits of that? And then maybe go back to so what? You know, there's no real specific order, but hopefully that helps.
But before we do the interview, just a few announcements. If you enjoyed this presentation, which I hope you did, please visit this website, tinyurl.com, message feedback, to provide us feedback on this presentation so we can continue to improve for next time. And sign up for our next workshop, which is going to be December 1st, Friday. It's going to be social media for science communication. You don't need to have Twitter. It's going to be focused on Twitter, but you don't need to have a Twitter to come to this workshop. Maybe then you can decide if it's right for you. But social media can be a very good tool to help you build your network and share your story. So that's going to be December 1st. It's a room change. It won't be here. It'll be at the John Muir Institute for the Environment Barn Conference Room. So it should be on the map. You should be able to figure it out. I will send this out to the listserv, so make sure you signed in when you walk in here. I will pass it on to Amy and Camila now. So let's give them good luck.